I want you to understand something before I tell you any of this. I was there. I stood maybe 20 paces from the sovereign when it happened. I saw the three of them brought out. I saw what he did. And for years afterward, when the young ones in the camps asked me how the war really ended, I would start telling it and then stop, because there is a moment in this story where my voice still does a thing I cannot control. So forgive me if I go slow. My name does not matter much anymore. In the old tongue I was called risque, which means something like the one who writes it down. That was my job. I was a court scribe, not a soldier, not a noble. I held a stylus, not a blade, and I recorded what the great ones said so that history would remember them the way they wanted to be remembered. History remembered them, just not the way they wanted. You have to picture the world first. The palace, I mean. Because if you don't see it, you won't understand how impossible all of this seemed. The sovereign seat was on a moon we called Vethkaren, a cold place, a beautiful, cruel, cold place. The sky there was not blue like the sky humans grew up under. It was the color of old bronze, streaked with the light of three suns that never quite set together, so there was never true night, only this long copper dusk that went on and on. The wind always smelled faintly of metal and frost. You got used to it. You stopped noticing it. And then a human would arrive, and the first thing they'd do was wrinkle their small flat face and say the air tasted like blood, and you'd remember. The palace itself was carved out of a single mountain of black glass, towers like spears, walkways suspended over nothing, held up by gravity fields that hummed so low you felt it in your teeth more than heard it. Servitor machines drifted through the halls on silent repulsors, polishing, carrying, watching. Everywhere you looked there was a war banner. We had a lot of war banners. The Ascendancy had been at war for 400 years and we had never lost. Not once. Not to anyone. We called ourselves the Coronai. The galaxy called us many things, most of them in fear. I tell you this so you understand the mood of that place. We were not nervous people. We were not a people who doubted ourselves. We had crossed the dark between stars and broken empire after empire, species after species, and we had filed them all away as either servants or corpses. The sovereign Camarn, the undimmed, had ruled for 60 years, and in 60 years he had buried 9 civilizations. When the humans first came up on our star charts, nobody in the court was worried. Nobody. I remember the laughter, actually. I wrote it down. It started, like a lot of terrible things start, with a small thing that nobody took seriously. The humans had a colony out on the edge of a system we wanted. Nothing special. A planet they'd half terraformed, some orbital stations, a few thousand of them scraping a living out of rock and ice. We sent a survey fleet. The survey fleet did what survey fleets do, which was arrive without asking and begin, assessing the resource viability of the region, which is the polite phrase for deciding what we were going to take. The humans asked us to leave. We did not leave. The humans asked again. And here is the part the court found so funny. The humans, this little new species nobody had heard of, this species that had been crawling around in their own home system for barely a few centuries, they sent us a formal declaration. Not a plea. Not an offer of tribute, a declaration of war, as if they had any idea what they were declaring war against. The sovereign had it read aloud in the throne hall. I was the one who read it, actually, because that was my duty, and I remember the way the nobles leaned back on their benches and let their throats make the clicking sound that is our laughter. The declaration was short. It did not threaten us with annihilation. It did not boast. It said more or less that the colony was their home, that they had built it with their own hands, and that they would defend it. It said one more line. I have never forgotten it. I read it out loud to a hall full of laughing aristocrats, and my own voice was light when I said it because I did not yet understand. It said, "You have not fought us before. You should consider very carefully whether you want to start." The sovereign laughed loudest of all. We crossed into their system 3 weeks later with 40 warships. I won't pretend the first battle was a defeat for us. It wasn't. We won. We always won. The humans had maybe a dozen ships in system, ugly little things, all sharp angles and exposed engines, nothing like the smooth, predatory beauty of a Coronai dreadnought. We tore through them. We cracked their orbital stations. We burned their fleet down to debris. But it cost us. That was the thing nobody in the court would say out loud at first. We lost 4 ships taking that system. 4. Against a backwater colony with a dozen defenders. The humans did not run when they should have run. They did not surrender when surrender was the only sane choice. One of their little frigates, crippled, leaking atmosphere, with its crew certainly dying, that frigate turned itself around and rammed our flagship's escort at full burn and took it apart from the inside. The escort had a crew of 900 Coronai. The frigate had a crew of 40. When the after-action reports came in, the admirals filed them under acceptable losses and irrational enemy behavior. That second phrase, I copied it into the record a dozen times in those early months. Irrational enemy behavior. We kept writing it. We never once stopped to ask why an enemy who kept behaving irrationally also kept costing us so much. That was our first mistake, not the war. The mistake was the word we chose, irrational. We decided they were stupid because we could not imagine being them. Now I have to tell you about the 3 of them, the 3 prisoners, because everything turns on the 3 of them. They were taken about a year into the war. By then the war had gotten strange. We were winning every battle and somehow not winning the war. The humans fought like nothing we had ever faced. Not because they were stronger, they weren't, but because they did not break. Other species, when you smashed their fleet and burned their cities, they would calculate the odds and they would kneel. It is the sensible thing. It is what every species we had ever met did, eventually. The humans did not calculate the odds. Or they did, and they decided the odds didn't matter, which to us was the same as madness. So the war ground on and ships were lost on both sides, and somewhere in the middle of a battle over a moon whose name I never learned, a Coronai boarding party captured 3 living humans off a wrecked gunship. This was rare. Humans usually did not let themselves be captured. They had a reputation by then, among our soldiers, in the lower decks where the nobles didn't listen, for fighting until there was nothing left to fight with, and then for doing something worse. There were stories. Soldiers told them quietly. Stories about human crews who, when boarded, would simply trigger their own reactors rather than be taken. The court called this fanaticism. The soldiers who had seen it up close called it something else, with a different look in their eyes. But these 3 were taken alive. They'd been knocked unconscious in the wreck. That's the only reason. When they woke up, they were already in chains aboard a Coronai cruiser, and there was nothing left for them to blow up. The sovereign heard about them and made a decision that surprised everyone. He had them brought to Vethkaren, to the palace, to him. I think, and I have had a very long time to think about this, I think he was bored. 60 years of victory, 9 dead civilizations, and now this little stubborn species that wouldn't lie down, that was costing him ships and patience, that his own admirals kept describing with that word, irrational. I think he wanted to look at them himself, to see the madness up close, to understand it, or maybe just to enjoy crushing it personally. So 3 humans came to the palace of black glass, and I, the one who writes it down, was ordered to be present and record everything. Let me tell you what they looked like, those 3, because I wrote it down at the time, and the words I used embarrass me now. There were 2 males and 1 female by their reckoning. Small, all 3 of them. Soft-skinned. No carapace, no scales, no natural weapon of any kind, just bare flesh and these strange flat faces with 2 forward eyes and these little mobile mouths. They came into the throne hall in the iron restraints we used for dangerous prisoners, which on them looked almost comical, like we'd shackled children. The female was clearly their leader. You could tell by the way the other 2 angled themselves toward her without seeming to think about it, the way soldiers do around an officer they trust. Her uniform was torn and stained, but she'd done something to it, straightened it, squared it at the shoulders, so that even in chains she walked into the most powerful court in the galaxy looking like she was the one who'd called the meeting. Her name, I would learn, was Voss, Captain Elena Voss. One of the males was big for a human, broad, with a heavy brow and hands like a laborer's. Reyes. Sergeant Tomas Reyes. He had a wound on the side of his head that had bled and dried and nobody had cleaned, and he kept his eyes moving across the hall the whole time, counting the exits, counting the guards. Counting us, I realize now. The way you count an enemy. And the third was very young. The female, Voss, kept herself half a step in front of him the whole time, the way you'd shield something. His name was Aiko, Private Aiko. He could not have been more than 19 of their years. His hands were shaking. He was trying very hard not to let them shake and not quite managing it. And when I wrote my record that day, I wrote that the young one displayed appropriate fear in the presence of the sovereign. I was wrong about that too. It wasn't fear of the sovereign. I learned that later, it was something else. The throne hall was full. When the sovereign chose to make a spectacle of something, the nobles came, because to be absent was to be noticed. They filled the benches in their war finery, hundreds of them, and the great servitor machines hung in the upper dark with their lenses glowing, recording. The three suns threw long copper light through the high windows and laid it across the black glass floor. The sovereign Cameron sat on the seat carved from a single meteorite. He was old by then, but old in the way an old blade is old, thinner, harder, more dangerous than it had ever been. He looked down at the three small creatures in chains and he was quiet for a long time. The whole hall was quiet. Even the gravity field seemed to hum lower. Then he spoke, and he spoke to them in their own tongue, because the sovereign was vain about his learning and had spent the voyage having a translation engine teach him human speech, and he wanted them to understand him without a machine in between. "You are far from home," he said. Captain Voss looked up at him. She did not look away. None of them looked away, but she was the one he was speaking to and she held his gaze, and in our culture that alone was an act of staggering insolence. A lesser being does not hold the gaze of the sovereign. It simply isn't done. She did it anyway. "We're closer than you are," she said. A hiss went through the benches. The sovereign raised one hand to still it. I was scratching the words into the record as fast as I could, and I remember my stylus actually paused, because I had never heard anyone speak to him like that and live past the next breath. "You are bold," he said. "Your whole species is bold. It has cost me 40 years' worth of patience in a single year of war." He leaned forward. "I have destroyed civilizations older and greater than yours. I have made kings into kennel beasts. And yet your little colonies do not surrender. Your little ships do not flee. Why?" And Voss, I will never forget this, Voss tilted her head, like the question genuinely puzzled her, like he had asked something that had an obvious answer she was surprised he didn't know. "Because it's ours," she said. "You keep thinking we're going to do the math and decide it isn't worth it. You don't get it. There's no number where it stops being worth it. It's our home." The sovereign sat back. "Everyone says that," he said, "until I show them the cost. Here is where I have to slow down. Here is the part where my voice does the thing." The sovereign decided to show them the cost. It was not, I think, even cruelty for its own sake. That's the part that I have never been able to make peace with. He believed sincerely, in the marrow of his ancient bones, that he was teaching them something. That this stubborn little species simply had not yet been shown the price of resistance in a way they could feel. And once they felt it, once they truly understood what defying the coronae meant, they would do what everyone always did. They would break. He was going to break them by example. He was going to make the lesson personal. He gestured to his executioner, a hulking figure of the warrior caste who carried the ceremonial blade, a thing of black metal as long as a human was tall. And the sovereign said to Voss, in her own tongue, so she would understand every word, "You will choose. One of you walks free to carry the lesson home. The other two die here now at my feet so that your people learn what your defiance buys them. Choose which of you lives, or I will kill all three and let your colonies wonder what became of you." The hall went absolutely silent. The nobles loved this. I could feel them loving it. This was the sovereign at his finest, they thought, turning the enemy's loyalty into a blade and making them hold it against their own throats. I watched Captain Voss's face. I was good at my job, and part of my job was reading faces, even alien ones, and I watched something happen in hers. She did not cry. She did not beg. She turned slowly to look at the young one, at Aiko, the boy whose hands had been shaking. And the boy who I had written down as displaying appropriate fear. The boy shook his head. Just barely. Just a small movement. And he said something to her, very quietly, in a human language the translation engine didn't catch, and whatever he said made the big one close his eyes for a moment. Then Captain Voss turned back to the sovereign. And she smiled. I had been recording the speech of important beings for most of my life, and I had never in all that time seen anyone smile at the sovereign Camarn. It was not a happy smile. I do not have the right word for it even now. It was the smile of someone who has just been handed a thing they were dreading and found, underneath the dread, something that was almost like relief. Like the worst had finally arrived, and now at least they knew its shape. "No," she said. The sovereign blinked. "No. I'm not choosing," Voss said. "I'm not going to do that for you. You want me to pick which of my people you murder so you can feel like you've won something. I won't. You want to kill them, you kill all of us. You don't get our help doing it." Reyes beside her lifted his chin and said, loud enough for the whole hall to hear, in a voice that didn't shake at all, "All three." And the boy, Aiko, the boy whose hands had shaken so hard, the boy straightened his spine and his hands were not shaking anymore, not at all, and he said it too. "All three." I want to tell you that the sovereign hesitated. I want to tell you that something in him recognized what he was looking at and pulled back from it. That would make a better story. But I write things down the way they happened, not the way they should have. He did not hesitate. I think their refusal angered him in a way that surprised even him. He had offered one of them their life. It was, by his logic, a mercy, and they had thrown it back at his feet. He was the sovereign Camarn the Undimmed, who had buried 9 civilizations, and 3 soft-skinned creatures in chains had just told him no in front of his entire court. He gave the order with a single flick of his hand. I am not going to describe what the executioner did. I wrote it down once in full in the official record because that was my duty, and I have spent a long time since then wishing I could unwrite it. So I will tell you only this. They did not beg, not one of them. The big one went first and went without a sound. The captain went second, and the last thing she did was turn her head toward the young one and say something to him, and I was close enough to hear it, and the translation engine caught it this time. She said, "Eyes up, kid, we don't look away." And the boy, 19 years old, light years from a home he was never going to see again, standing in a hall full of monsters who had just killed the 2 people he trusted most in the universe. The boy kept his eyes up. He did not look away. He looked straight at the sovereign Camarn the Undimmed until the very last moment of his life, and there was no fear in his face at all. There was something else, something I did not have a word for then. I have a word for it now. It was promise. The hall was quiet for a moment after. Then the nobles began the clicking that is our applause, and it rose and filled the black glass chamber, and the sovereign sat back on his meteorite throne looking satisfied. Looking like a teacher whose lesson had landed. He turned to me. "Record it," he said. "All of it. Send the recording to their colonies. Let them watch what defiance costs. Let them see their soldiers die at my feet. Then we will see how loud they declare their little wars." So I recorded it, and the servitor machines packaged the recording, the whole thing, the offer and the refusal and the blade and the 3 bodies, and it was beamed out across the dark toward the human colonies as a message. The sovereign meant it as a warning. I have thought about that so many times since. He meant it as a warning. He thought he was sending them fear. He was sending them a face, 3 faces. He was sending an entire species the image of their own people standing in chains in the most powerful court in the galaxy and refusing, with their dying breath, to look away. He did not understand what that does to humans. None of us did. We thought fear worked on them the way it worked on everyone. But fear is not the only thing that spreads. That night, the long copper dusk that passed for night on Veth Karen, I could not rest. I kept seeing the boy's face, the way it changed, the way the shaking stopped, the way he said all 3 with his spine straight. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself we had won again, the way we always won. I told myself that in a few days the human colonies would receive the recording and they would finally understand the price, and they would lay down their arms and the war would be over, and the court would call it the sovereign's wisdom. I was right that the war would be over in a few days. I was wrong about everything else. The recording reached the nearest human colony on the 2nd day. We intercepted their communications after, so I know what happened in the order it happened. On the 2nd day they received it. On the 2nd day they watched their captain and their sergeant and their 19-year-old private die in chains in front of a laughing alien court, and watched those 3 refuse to break, and watched them keep their eyes up. And the humans did not send back fear. On the 3rd day, every human transmission across that whole region of space went quiet. All of it. Total silence, where before there had been the constant chatter of a species at war. Our intelligence officers were pleased. They reported that the enemy had gone dark, that morale had collapsed, that the lesson had worked. It had not collapsed, it had focused. We didn't understand the silence. We thought it was grief. We thought it was a species in mourning, going still the way a wounded animal goes still. It was not grief, or it was grief, but it was grief that had decided to become something. It was the silence of a whole people putting down everything else they had been doing. It was the silence of a species deciding, all at once, in one voice, that the war they had been fighting to defend their homes was over, and a new one was about to begin. People ask me sometimes when the fear started. They want a single moment, a first crack, and I understand why they want that, because it would be cleaner. But it didn't come like that. Fear didn't walk into the palace of black glass through the front gate and announce itself. It came the way cold comes into a room. You don't notice the 1st degree. You don't notice the 2nd. And then one day you look up from your work and realize you've been shivering for hours, and you don't know how long it's been since you were warm. That's how the 5 days went. Day by day, the court got colder, and nobody could say exactly when it had started, and nobody wanted to be the first to admit they'd noticed. Let me take them one at a time, the 5 days. I lived every one of them. I wrote every one of them down. The 1st day. The 1st day was triumph. I have to be honest about that, even though it shames me now. The morning after the execution, the court was loud with satisfaction. The nobles replayed the recording for each other on their personal lenses and made the clicking laughter at the part where the captain refused the sovereign's mercy, because to them, her refusal was just stupidity, the final proof that these creatures were too foolish to live. The sovereign Cameron held audience that day in a fine mood. He spoke of how the war was effectively decided. He said the humans had needed only to be shown the cost in a language they could feel, and now they had felt it, and the rest would be cleanup. He ordered the war fleets to press toward the human core worlds. He was already speaking of what tribute he would demand, what their homeworld would be renamed, which of their leaders would be brought to Veth Karen in chains to kneel where the 3 soldiers had died. I wrote it all down. The record from that 1st day is full of confidence. Reading it back now is like reading the words of a man cheerfully describing the weather on the morning of a flood. One small thing happened that 1st day. So small I almost didn't record it. A long-range scout, One of our fast, lightly armed reconnaissance vessels patrolling the edge of the contested space missed its scheduled report. Just one report. Scouts miss reports sometimes. Solar interference, a damaged relay, a lazy officer. The watch officer noted it and assumed it would clear up by the next cycle. It did not clear up by the next cycle. But nobody was worried yet. Why would they be? We were winning, we were always winning. The second day. On the second day, the recording reached the first human colony, and the humans went silent, and our intelligence officers brought the sovereign the good news that the enemy's communications had gone dark across the whole region. He was delighted. I remember him saying, and I wrote it word for word, "You see, the proud ones are always the easiest to break. You only have to show them that their pride has a price, and the rest of them go quiet." The nobles agreed. The nobles always agreed. But that second day, 2 more scouts missed their reports. Now 1 scout going quiet is interference. 3 scouts going quiet, all in the same stretch of space, all near the human lines, that is not interference. That is a pattern, and the watch officers were trained to notice patterns, and they did notice, and a careful note went up the chain to the War Council. The War Council was not concerned. The War Council had a theory. Their theory was that a few human stragglers, desperate, leaderless, the remnants of a broken species lashing out in grief, had ambushed our scouts. The council found this reassuring, actually. It fit their picture of the enemy, wounded animals lashing out, the death twitches of a beaten thing. They sent a heavier patrol out to the region to sweep it clear. A proper warship with escorts, the kind of force that could handle anything short of a fleet. I want you to hold on to that. They sent a warship and escorts to sweep up what they believed were a few panicking survivors. That second day, I went to my chamber when the audience ended, and I sat for a long time, and I did not write anything at all, which was unusual for me. I'm the one who writes it down, but I kept thinking about the boy's face, the way the shaking had stopped, and I kept thinking about the silence, how the whole human region had gone dark all at once, in a single day, as if every voice across hundreds of worlds had stopped talking at the exact same moment. People don't all fall silent from grief at the same moment. Grief is messy. Grief is loud and then quiet and then loud again. Grief doesn't synchronize. The only thing that goes that quiet, that fast, that completely, is something that has just received an order. I did not write that down. I wasn't ready to think it yet, but it sat in me like a stone. The third day. On the third day, the heavy patrol we'd sent to sweep the region went dark too. This was the first crack you could actually hear. A warship and 4 escorts, thousands of Koronai warriors, the kind of force that had, a year ago, broken human fleets. It reached the region where the scouts had vanished. It sent 1 report saying the area was clear, no enemy contacts, debris fields consistent with our own missing scouts. Then it sent a second report. The second report was fragmentary. It came in pieces, garbled, the way a transmission comes when the ship sending it is taking damage and the systems are failing. We pieced it together later. Most of it was sensor data and damage alerts. But there was 1 voice transmission in it, from the warship's captain, and the watch officers played it for the War Council, and the War Council made me come and listen so I could record it for the history. I have it memorized. The captain's voice was steady at first. He was reporting contact with an enemy force. Then his voice changed. He said the enemy ships were not on any of our recognition charts, new designs, fast, too many of them. He said they were not maneuvering like the humans had maneuvered before. He said, and this is the part I have never forgotten, he said, they are not trying to win. They are trying to make sure none of us go home. Then the transmission ended. Not cut off, ended, the way a sentence ends when the person speaking it stops existing. The War Council sat with that for a while. The phrase hung in the air of the council chamber. They are not trying to win. For people like us, who measured every battle by victory and defeat, by gains and losses, by the careful arithmetic of conquest, It was almost impossible to understand. An enemy who was not trying to win. Then what were they trying to do? One of the older admirals understood. I saw it in his face. He was old enough to have fought species we'd long since buried, and he had seen a great many ways for a war to go, and the phrase frightened him in a way it didn't frighten the younger ones. He said, very quietly, "An enemy who is not trying to win is an enemy who has stopped caring whether they survive." The young admiral scoffed. The old one did not. That night the old admiral requested an audience with the sovereign and recommended pulling our forward fleets back to defensible positions and reassessing. The sovereign refused. The sovereign said pulling back would make the Coronai look afraid, and the Coronai were never afraid, and certainly not of a wounded animal. He ordered the advance to continue. He ordered our main war fleets to push harder toward the human core. I wrote down his order. My stylus was not quite steady when I wrote it. I told myself it was the cold. The fourth day. On the fourth day, everything we knew about the war stopped being true. It came in all at once, the way the silence had come in all at once. For 3 days we had been losing scouts and a patrol out at the edge of things, far away, easy to explain. On the fourth day the reports started coming from everywhere at the same time, and they were not about the edge of things anymore. The humans were attacking, but that word attacking doesn't carry it. We knew what a human attack looked like. We'd been fighting their attacks for a year. They defended their worlds ferociously. They made us pay for every system, but it was always defense. They fought to hold what was theirs. They fought to make us stop. This was not that. This was every human ship, everywhere, all at once, abandoning the worlds they had spent a year bleeding to protect and coming for us. Think about what that means. For a year they had fought to defend their colonies, refusing to give up a single rock. And now, in the space of a day, they simply let those colonies go. They didn't even try to hold them. Our advancing fleets reached human worlds that had been defended to the last ship a month before and found them undefended. Empty orbitals, open skis. The humans had pulled every warship off every world and pointed them in one direction. At us. Not at our fleets, at us. At Vethkaren, at the Palace of Black Glass, at the Sovereign. They had watched the recording. They had watched their 3 soldiers die in chains in front of the laughing court, and they had not asked themselves how to win the war. They had asked themselves how to reach the throne. I was in the War Council chamber when the picture came together, when the analysts finally laid all the reports over one another and saw the shape of it. A great map hung in the air, a map of the whole contested region, every star a point of light. And the analysts ran the human fleet movements forward, projected the courses, and 100 lines of light appeared on the map, sweeping in from 100 different directions, from 100 abandoned worlds. And every single one of them converged on the same point. On us. The chamber went very quiet. The kind of quiet I'd only heard once before, in the throne hall, in the moment after the captain said no. One of the young admirals, the loud one, the one who had scoffed at the old admiral, said, "It's a feint. They can't possibly be committing everything. They're leaving their homes undefended. No species does that. It's irrational." There was that word again, irrational. And the old admiral, the one who'd understood the dead captain's voice, looked at the young one, and he said something I wrote down and have carried with me ever since. He said, "We keep using that word, irrational. We have used it for a year. Every time they did something we could not have done, we wrote it down as madness so we would not have to be afraid of it, but it was never madness. We simply value our lives more than they value losing their homes. They are not abandoning their worlds. Do you not understand yet? To them, we took their worlds the moment we killed those 3. Now there is nothing left to defend. There is only us, and they are coming to settle it." The young admiral had no answer. None of them did. The map hung there in the air, 100 lines of light all reaching for one point, and the point was where we were standing. I left the War Council, and I walked the long, suspended walkways of the palace, out over the nothing, with the copper dusk light coming through the high black windows, and I tried to understand what I was feeling. It took me a while to recognize it because I had never felt it before. None of us had. That was the thing about being Koronai. We were the ones who frightened the galaxy. We were the predator at the top of every food chain we had ever encountered. For 400 years, the cold thing in the dark that other species lay awake fearing, that was us. We had never been the prey. And now, walking those empty walkways, I felt it for the first time. That specific, hollow, animal feeling. The feeling of knowing that something is coming for you, that it knows where you are, that it is not going to stop, and that nothing you have ever relied on is going to be enough. The humans had taught us that feeling. They had taught it to us on purpose. That was the lesson the sovereign never understood he was inviting. He thought he was the teacher. He thought fear was a thing he handed out from a throne. He found out that fourth day that fear is a thing that can be sent back. I went to him that evening, to the sovereign. It was not my place. I was a scribe, not a counselor, but I had recorded his every word for years, and he tolerated me near him in a way he tolerated few others, the way you tolerate a familiar piece of furniture. He was alone in the throne hall. The benches were empty. The servitor machines hung dark in the upper reaches, and the sovereign Camarn the Undimmed, who had buried 9 civilizations, sat on his meteorite throne in the long copper light and looked smaller than I had ever seen him. He knew, by then he knew, the reports had all reached him. I said nothing. I just stood where I always stood, at my place with my stylus, ready to write down whatever he said, because that was the only thing I knew how to do. He spoke without looking at me. He said, "They are coming here." "Yes, Sovereign," I said. "They have left their homes open, undefended. They have given up everything they spent a year protecting." He turned his ancient head and looked at me, and there was something in his eyes I had never seen there in 60 years of audiences. "Why would they do that, Risca? Help me understand it. You watch their faces. You write down everything. Why would a species throw away its own survival to reach one old king on one cold moon?" And I thought about the boy, the 19-year-old, the shaking hands that stopped shaking, the captain turning her head at the very end to say, "Eyes up, kid, we don't look away." I said the truest thing I have ever said. Because, Sovereign, I do not think they came to win the war. I think, when they watched those 3 die, they stopped thinking about the war at all. I paused. The cold was in my throat. I think they decided that you, personally, were going to learn what you had done, and I do not think there is any number of their own dead that will make them stop until you have. The sovereign was quiet for a long time. Then he said, very softly, almost to himself, "I offered to spare one of them." "Yes," I said. "It was mercy." "Yes, Sovereign, I think it was. I think you meant it as mercy." I looked at the place on the black glass floor where the 3 of them had stood. It had been cleaned, of course, polished by the servitors until it shone. You could not have known anything had happened there. But I do not think they wanted your mercy. I think they wanted you to understand that you could not buy them, and you could not frighten them, and you could not make them help you. And when you killed them for it, I think that was the moment you lost the war. We just did not know it yet. We were still laughing. He did not punish me for saying it. I half expected him to. A year before he would have. A year before he had been the sovereign Camarn the Undimmed, and no scribe spoke to him like that and kept his tongue. But he was not undimmed anymore. Something had gone out of him. He simply turned his head back toward the empty hall and looked at the clean and shining floor, and he said, in a voice I had to lean close to hear, 5 days ago I thought I understood every species in the galaxy. I thought I had met every kind of being there was. The proud ones, the clever ones, the strong ones. I have broken them all. He closed his ancient eyes. I never met a kind that would rather die reaching me than live without trying. I did not know such a thing could exist. He opened his eyes. "Tell the fleets to come home," he said. "All of them. Recall everything. Form a defensive line around Veth Karen. We will meet them here." I wrote it down. The order to recall the entire war fleet of the Coronai Ascendancy, the fleet that had burned 9 civilizations, the fleet that had never once been recalled in fear, back to defend one cold moon from a species we had declared, just a year before, too primitive to matter. That was the 4th day. The fleets were still coming home when the 5th day began. The humans got there first.